I'm Lewis, the least important son of Duke Calvin. 3 months ago, I got hit by a truck and woke up in a completely different world, a world with knights, empires, and ice giants. Sounds cool, right? Not really. My father sent me north to develop a frozen, empty piece of land near the border. It's dangerous, cold, and nobody thinks I'll survive. He gave me some gold, a little food, a handful of knights, and basically said goodbye forever. I was sitting in a rattling carriage, freezing, feeling sorry for myself, when something amazing happened. A voice appeared in my head and told me I now had a daily intelligence system. Every day, it sends me useful information, things like where to find resources, warnings about danger, and even secrets about people around me. The first messages came in right away. Most were just interesting gossip. A prince got killed in the capital, and my father had yet another child. But 2 messages really mattered. First, a school of rare fish called northern crystal cod would show up nearby at dawn. These fish are super valuable. Their bones can make knights stronger, and they sell for a lot of money. That was my first real chance to get ahead. Second, and this one scared me, one of my own knights, a guy named Roy, had put poison in my dinner soup. A man my own family assigned to protect me was trying to kill me before we even arrived. Without the system, I would have eaten that soup and died tonight. But now I knew. I stepped out of the carriage, looked at the bubbling pot, looked at the knights waiting for me to eat first, and smiled. I finally had an edge in this cruel, frozen world. I took the bowl of soup and raised it to my lips, but then I stopped. I handed it to Roy and told him to drink it instead. His face went white. He tried to make excuses, saying the Lord should eat first, but I gave him a direct order. When he still refused, Captain Lambert and the other knights figured out something was wrong. They surrounded Roy and forced the bowl toward him. Roy panicked and tried to run, but they grabbed him and held him down. Now everyone knew the soup was poisoned. I asked him who sent him. He broke down and confessed. It was my older brother Benjamin. He wanted me dead, so I couldn't compete for the family title. Benjamin promised Roy a promotion and a ticket back south if he killed me. Roy begged for mercy, saying he was just following orders. But I couldn't let a traitor live. I gave Lambert the signal. One swing of his sword, and it was over. The camp went quiet after that. I could see it in everyone's eyes. They were scared. Not just of what happened to Roy, but because they understood him. They didn't want to be here either. They were all sent north because their families didn't care about them, just like mine didn't care about me. So I gave them a choice. I told them anyone who wanted to leave could go right now. I'd even write a letter to protect them. But after tonight, desertion would mean death. Nobody moved. They knew going back wasn't safe either. Then I spoke from my heart. I told them the truth. We were all thrown away by people who thought we were worthless. But that didn't make it true. They earned their positions through real effort and real fights. The people who sent us here were the real cowards, sitting comfortably in their castles. I asked them to imagine what could happen if we actually made it. If we built something real in this frozen land. I promised them that if we survived, I would share everything with them. Some of them could become barons, viscounts, maybe even earls. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then Lambert dropped to one knee, hit his chest with his fist, and swore to follow me. One by one, the rest did the same. Standing there in the cold, watching my knights kneel before me, I felt something change. We weren't just a group of rejects anymore. We were a team, and we were going to fight for our future together. The next morning, I could already see a difference in my knights. After last night's speech and a good meal of clean chicken soup, they moved faster and talked with more purpose. Some checked their gear without being told. Others started discussing plans for the north. It was a good sign, but I knew words alone wouldn't hold them for long. I needed to give them something real. Thanks to my intelligence system, I knew exactly where to find it. I led everyone to a frozen river about 3 kilometers west. The knights looked at the thick ice and clearly thought I was crazy. Catching fish under solid ice? A few of them quietly laughed behind my back. But Lambert trusted me. He swung his hammer and started breaking through. The others followed, and soon a crack opened up in the ice. Dark, freezing water rushed up through the gap. We lowered a net, and within seconds, the rope went tight. A bright silver fish burst out of the water and flopped onto the ice. Then another, and another. We pulled out 12 northern crystal cod in total. Their scales sparkled in the morning sun like jewels. One of the knights who knew about these fish shouted that they were incredibly rare. Their bones could purify a knight's blood and make them stronger. That got everyone's attention fast. Then I told them half the fish were theirs. I thought a few of them might actually cry. These were men who had been thrown away by their families. And here I was sharing something that even rich nobles rarely got to taste. We made fish soup over the campfire. It turned a strange, silvery white color as it cooked, almost glowing. When it was ready, I drank first to show them it was fine, and then they all drank too. The effect was immediate. Warmth spread through my whole body. I could feel my blood getting cleaner, my body getting lighter. The knights sat down, closed their eyes, and focused on absorbing the energy. Then something incredible happened. One young trainee started glowing with a faint silver light. He had advanced, jumped from apprentice to full knight, just like that. Then a second trainee did the same thing. The camp exploded with excitement. 2 promotions from a single bowl of soup. In the South, that kind of progress would take years of training and a fortune in resources. Every knight who drank the soup felt stronger, even the ones who didn't advance. They looked at me like I was some kind of chosen one. They didn't know about my system. They just thought I had been blessed by the gods. But what really won them over wasn't the fish. It was that I shared it with them. Nobody had ever treated them that way before. They started chanting my name across the frozen land, and this time, I knew their loyalty was real. After the fish soup, I sat down and practiced the tidal breathing technique, a secret method passed down in my family. I focused on my breathing, and I could feel the energy from the crystal cod flowing through my body, cleaning my blood and warming my bones. When I finished, I had advanced to mid-level official knight. That sounds impressive, but in my family, it's nothing. My older brother is already a peak knight and famous across the empire. The knight ranks go from apprentice, to official, to elite, to transcendent, to peak, and finally legendary. I was still near the bottom, but I wasn't worried. With my daily intelligence system, I knew more opportunities would come. When I opened my eyes, the knights cheered for me again. That felt good. Their loyalty was solid now, at least for the moment. I asked Lambert how far we were from Frosthalberd City, the capital of the northern province. About 200 kilometers. Normally that would take 5 or 6 days, but I ordered everyone to push harder and get there in 3. With their morale so high, I knew they could do it. The reason I was in such a rush? My system had given me 3 new pieces of intelligence. First, in 3 days, a young man named Ware would show up at the city's black market as a slave. He had the potential to become a top-tier knight. That kind of talent was incredibly rare. Top-tier knights were the backbone of kingdoms. I couldn't let someone like that slip away. Second, an alchemy apprentice named Silco would also end up at the same black market. He had stolen a secret formula from the Golden Essence Guild and was hiding among the slaves to escape. Alchemists were like chemists in this world. They could turn cheap materials into valuable ones. Even my powerful family only had 3 of them. An apprentice would be a huge gain for me. My plan was simple: buy both of them at the slave market before anyone realized their true value. The third piece of news was that Duke Edmund, the governor of the north, was furious about all the useless noble sons being dumped in his territory. I couldn't blame him. The empire wanted strong young lords to secure the border, but every family just sent their worst. I was one of them, at least on paper. Edmund had sacrificed everything to stop a rebellion 2 years ago: his fortresses, his army, even his only son. And now, instead of real help, he was getting gamblers, lazy kids, and spoiled brats. His reports described the other noble sons arriving in the north, and none of them sounded impressive. My own file probably said the same kind of things. But that was fine with me. Let everyone underestimate me. While they saw a worthless 8th son, I had a system feeding me secrets every day and a group of loyal knights who believed in me. The lower their expectations, the bigger my advantage. We pushed hard and made it to Frostland City in 3 days. As we approached the gates, the guards noticed our group. Over 40 knights marching together with my family's Crimson Moon flag flying from the carriage. I stepped out, introduced myself as Louis Calvin, and told them I was here to see Duke Edmund. The Calvin name still carried weight, even this far north. A middle-aged official came out quickly to lead us inside. The city itself was rough. The streets were wide but full of holes, covered in snow and mud. Most buildings were old stone and wood, some half-ruined. The people walking around looked either exhausted or empty, soldiers worn out from years of fighting, and common folk just trying to survive. It wasn't pretty, But considering all the wars and rebellions this place had been through, I was honestly surprised it was still standing at all. We were taken to the governor's office. No fancy decorations, just a desk, some old bookshelves, and a military flag on the wall. Behind the desk sat Duke Edmund. He had a deep scar running down his face, and his presence filled the room like a wall of stone. This man had fought real wars and lost his own son defending the North. He looked me over and wasn't impressed. He called me a mid-level knight with a mocking tone and compared me to my famous older brother. I didn't react. In this world, strength is everything, and I wasn't strong yet. No point getting upset about the truth. I skipped the small talk and handed him my royal documents. I was here to pick my territory. He spread a map across the desk. The northern province was enormous, roughly half the size of Russia from my old world. A few areas were marked in red as off-limits, but everything else was open. And because I had arrived earlier than most of the other noble sons, who were dragging their feet, dreading the north, I had first pick. This was the moment I had been preparing for. Over the past few days, my intelligence system had been feeding me information, and I had been piecing it all together, comparing locations, looking for the best possible spot. I already knew exactly what I wanted. I pointed to a spot where the Green Rock Ravine met the Gray Moss Tundra, about 75 kilometers from Frosthowl Fjord. Edmund looked surprised. The area was one of the best in the entire north. Slightly warmer temperatures, land where crops could actually grow, a stream for fresh water and fishing, and veins of cold iron or underground. In a frozen wasteland, this was practically a gold mine. He studied me again, clearly rethinking his first impression. He even praised my choice, saying the North might have hope if every frontier lord had my eye for opportunity. He stamped my registration with the official Frostland seal, and just like that, the land was mine. I kept my face calm, but inside I was thrilled. What Edmund didn't know was that my system had shown me things about this territory that even he hadn't discovered yet. If he knew the land's true value, he never would have let me have it. But he didn't know, and now it was mine. I claimed 300 square kilometers of northern land and named it Crimson Tide Territory, partly for my family's crimson crest and partly to remember the world I came from. To Duke Edmund, my land was just a slightly better patch of frozen ground. But thanks to my intelligence system, I knew it was so much more than that. The rivers had fish migrations every spring and autumn, a reliable food source. The land had geothermal springs, which was almost unheard of in the frozen north. Those springs warmed the soil enough to grow tough crops, and even created natural hot springs. While everyone else would be freezing, I could be soaking in warm water. Not bad at all. But the real treasure was underground. There was regular cold iron ore for making weapons, and at the edge of my territory, a hidden vein of something called magic marrow ore. It was like sulfur from my old world, a key ingredient for making explosives. I wasn't strong enough to mine or protect it yet, but someday I'd use it to change everything. Imagine, explosives against knights. The thought gave me chills. Before leaving Edmund's office, I had one more move to make. I had my knights bring in 2 chests. I opened the first one, 3 live northern crystal cod, their silver scales glowing in the firelight. Edmund's eyes went wide. Even he, the governor of the entire north, could barely get his hands on these fish. And his daughter was apparently close to a breakthrough as an elite knight. These fish could push her over the edge. I told him the first 3 were a gift. Then I opened the second chest, 3 more crystal cod. These ones were for trade. Edmund laughed and called me sly. He asked what I wanted. I told him straight, people, soldiers, craftsmen, knights, I needed all of them. We haggled back and forth. He wouldn't give me veterans, but he offered 120 new recruits, 30 craftsmen, and after some pushing, 10 apprentice knights and 3 full knights. Their loyalty would stay with the North, but they'd follow my orders. I shook his hand. It was a great deal. Way better than I expected, honestly. Edmund was tough, but fair. As I was leaving, he reminded me to visit the slave market and buy some workers. He even sent an official with me to make sure the merchants wouldn't cheat me. I thanked him and headed out. The slave market was already part of my plan. 2 very important people were waiting there. Weir, the future top-tier knight, and Silco, the runaway alchemy apprentice. I had the land, the people, and the resources lined up. Now it was time to go collect my hidden treasures. I headed to the eastern market of Frosthowl City. The place was rough, wooden stalls covered with cloth, the smell of animal hides and roasted meat in the cold air. It used to be a small trading spot, but after the Empire's expansion order, merchants had flooded in to make money off the new frontier lords. At the far end was the slave market. It was technically illegal, but up here in the north, nobody cared. Rows of people stood behind wooden fences, thin, pale, dressed in rags. Most kept their heads down like they'd given up on life. A few still had some fight in their eyes, but one crack of the trader's whip and that disappeared fast. A trader spotted me and rushed over with a big fake smile, showing off his products like they were livestock. He pointed out strong young men, promised they could work like oxen, and even hinted at other services. I shut that down immediately. But I wasn't here to browse. I was here for two specific people. My eyes found the first one, a small, thin boy curled up in a woman's arms, shaking like a scared animal. Nobody looking at him would think twice. But my system told me this was Weir, the boy with the potential to become a top-tier knight. Someday, this trembling kid could be a warrior who changes the outcome of wars. Then I spotted the second one, a skinny man hiding in the back of the crowd, head down, messy gray hair covering his face, trying to be invisible. That was Silco, the alchemy apprentice on the run from the Golden Essence Guild. To everyone else, he looked like just another broken slave. To me, he was a future alchemist. The prices were 8 silver coins per man, 4 for women and children. Because the governor's official was standing next to me, the trader didn't dare overcharge. I bought everyone from that trader, over 380 people. Then I visited a few more traders and picked up another 120. 500 slaves total, costing me 380 gold coins. That was nearly half of everything I had. After that, I stocked up on food, seeds, farming tools, and weapons. Everything cost double what it would in the south. By the time I finished, I had only 68 gold coins left. It hurt, but I needed all of it to build my territory. During my 2 days in the city, I also met some of the other noble sons sent north. They were exactly what I expected, useless. Some were drinking themselves stupid in taverns. Others sat around looking miserable, cursing the emperor and blaming their families. None of them had any real plan. I smiled, said very little, and moved on. They weren't my concern. On the morning we left, I sat on my horse at the city gates and looked out at the road ahead. Behind me stood nearly 1,000 people, my knights, soldiers, craftsmen, and slaves, all heading toward the southeastern border, toward Crimson Tide territory, my land. I gave the order, and we marched. We set up camp along the road and cooked wheat porridge for everyone. The slaves lined up with wooden bowls, looking grateful just to have a warm meal. Most of them had spent their lives fighting over scraps, so even basic porridge felt like a luxury to them. My cook George kept worrying we'd run out of food if I kept feeding everyone so generously. I told him to stop complaining and just cook. He didn't understand. I knew my territory had plenty of resources waiting. We'd be fine. Then my daily intelligence report came in. The first 2 messages weren't urgent. Some other frontier baron had frozen to death after drinking too much, and the governor's daughter had advanced to elite knight. Interesting, but not my problem. The third message, though, made me tense up. 70 hungry ice wolves were hiding in the canyon ahead, waiting to ambush us. They had smelled our food and were planning to attack. I wasn't afraid. My knights were strong enough. But if the wolves caught us off guard, we could lose people. So I called Lambert and sent scouting parties to check the canyon. They came back quickly with proof. Claw marks in the snow, the stink of wild animals, tracks everywhere. The wolves were starving and getting desperate. I decided to turn their trap into ours. I ordered my men to set up wooden spike traps throughout the canyon and hide soldiers along the edges with bows ready. It worked perfectly. The wolves crept toward us through the snow, nearly invisible with their gray-blue fur. But the moment the lead wolves hit our trap line, massive wooden spikes shot up from the ground and killed them instantly. The rest of the pack panicked. My archers let loose a storm of arrows, dropping wolf after wolf. Then Lambert led the knights in a charge. It was incredible to watch. Knights leaping through the air, their weapons glowing with red battle energy, cutting through wolves like they were nothing. The whole fight was over fast. 70 wolves, all dead, and my side barely had a scratch. The only tough moment was the Wolf King, a huge beast that stood its ground when all the others ran. It lunged at Lambert with everything it had, but Lambert dodged, powered up his sword, and finished it with one strike. We collected the spoils, 70 thick pelts, sharp fangs, and a huge pile of wolf meat. I told everyone to skin the wolves and share the meat as an extra meal. The soldiers cheered. In this freezing wasteland, hot meat was a real treat. I could see something change in the newer soldiers' eyes after that. It wasn't just obedience anymore, it was real respect. I'd warned them about the danger before it came, set a smart trap, won a clean victory, and then shared the rewards. That's how you earn loyalty, not just with words, but with results. After days of traveling, we finally arrived at Crimson Tide territory. My first look at the place wasn't exactly inspiring. It was flat, empty, and dead, barely a blade of grass anywhere. One of the southern knights muttered about how poor it looked. I didn't argue. On the surface, he was right. But I knew better. My intelligence system had already told me what was hiding beneath this barren land. I got to work immediately. I ordered the men to set up tents, find water by the river, start cutting wood for future buildings, and clear a training ground for the soldiers. The sounds of chopping and shouting broke the silence, and for the first time, this dead land felt alive. Over the next few days, I explored every part of my territory on foot. At the southern edge, I found steam rising from the ground where the snow had melted. I crouched down and felt warmth coming from the earth, geothermal vents, exactly where the system said they'd be. In a place where everything was frozen, underground heat was priceless. It could warm homes and help crops grow. Even better, I found natural hot springs nearby. I decided right then to build my manor next to them. While other frontier lords freeze in their tents, I'll be soaking in warm water. Not bad for an exiled lord. Next, I checked the river. The ice was starting to crack, and there were already a few birds catching small fish. It wasn't much yet, but my system told me this river would be full of fish once spring hit, a steady food supply for everyone. Then my scouts came back with even more good news. They found cold iron ore in the northwestern mountains, and deeper inside, a mineral that glowed dark red, magic essence ore. Lambert nearly lost his mind when he heard that. Magic essence ore was worth a fortune. I stayed calm since I already knew about it, but I also knew we weren't ready to mine it yet. That treasure would have to wait. The hardest part of my tour was visiting the native settlement. It was awful. Muddy, rotten-smelling ground. Crooked shacks that looked ready to collapse. The people living there were mostly old folks, women, and children in torn clothes that couldn't keep out the cold. The previous overseer had run away and left them to die. A few skinny children hid behind a doorway, watching me with scared eyes. I took some dry food from my pocket and held it out. They just stared at first, too afraid to take it. When they finally grabbed it, they ate so fast it was like they thought the food would disappear. One small boy didn't eat his. He tucked it inside his worn coat. When I asked why, he said in a tiny, shaking voice that he wanted to save it for his mother. That hit me hard. Back in the South, nobles fed their dogs better meat than what this child had ever tasted. It wasn't right. I stood up and called out to all the natives. Anyone willing to work could come to my camp. I promised food and shelter. They looked at me with empty, doubtful eyes. They'd been let down too many times to trust anyone easily. But after seeing the children eat, they slowly nodded and agreed to come. They figured things couldn't get any worse. And I was going to make sure they got better. I stood on a small hill and looked out at the land below, the spot I had chosen for our first settlement. It was near a geothermal vent, so the ground was warmer than anywhere else, and the hill blocked the worst of the icy wind. Perfect for building. Mike, my chief craftsman, asked if we should start with a castle. I said no. Houses for the people came first. When he asked where I would live, I told him I'd stay with everyone else. He looked surprised, but I meant it. We were all in this together. I designed the homes myself, combining what northerners here already built with Viking-style longhouses I remembered from my old world. Each house was dug about a third below ground to trap heat. The walls used wooden frames woven with willow branches and packed with grass and mud, strong, warm, and fast to build. Mike was impressed. He thought I was some kind of natural architect. Really, I just had two worlds of knowledge in my head. Construction started right away. Teams of 20 worked together, 2 soldiers leading 18 slaves and refugees. The frozen ground was brutal. Every hit of the shovel sent a jolt through your arms. I made a point of grabbing a shovel myself at different work sites. I'd dig for about 10 minutes, chat with the workers, then move on to the next group. I wasn't trying to do their job. I wanted them to see that I wasn't above them. When even the Lord is sweating in the dirt, nobody has an excuse to complain. I kept things simple as I walked around. That frame looks solid. Pack the mud thicker or you'll feel the cold tonight. Almost done? I'll send hot soup over. Small things, but they mattered. Morale went up everywhere I went. In just a few days, the first group of houses was finished. They looked like small hills poking out of the snow, roofs covered in thick grass and mud, blending right into the landscape. Simple on the outside, but warm and dry inside. For the frozen north, these were some of the best homes anyone could ask for. With the settlement taking shape, I decided it was time for something bigger, a celebration. I needed to win people's hearts, not just feed their stomachs. That night, we lit a huge bonfire on the open ground. Nearly 1,000 people gathered around it. Former slaves, northern natives, wanderers we'd picked up along the way, soldiers, and knights. Different backgrounds, but all of them now belonged to Crimson Tide territory. I stood on a large stone in front of the fire and spoke to them. I told them this celebration was to honor our first homes, that this land was now theirs, and they were its true masters. Nobody cheered. They just stared at me, confused. The word, masters, didn't mean anything to people who had only ever been told to work and obey. Some of them probably thought the celebration was actually some kind of punishment ceremony. That's how broken their trust was. I expected that reaction. Words alone wouldn't change anything. So I moved to the next part, rewards. I had Silco, my new steward. Yes, the alchemy apprentice I bought at the slave market. Read out a list of names. These were the hardest workers and most loyal people from the past few days. But when their names were called, they didn't step forward proudly. They flinched. They trembled. Some tried to kneel and beg for mercy. In their experience, being singled out by a lord meant punishment or death. They had no idea what was actually coming. The slaves whose names were called stepped forward, shaking with fear. They had no idea what was coming. I kept it simple. I told them they had worked hard to help build our territory, and now they would get what they deserved. Then I took their slave contracts from Silco and threw them into the bonfire. From today, you are no longer slaves. You are free people. For a second, nobody breathed. Then the place erupted. People screamed, cried, and fell to the ground. One man with a weathered face dropped to his knees and slammed his forehead against the frozen earth so hard it bled. He called me a savior. A young woman covered her face and sobbed. An old man raised his trembling hands like he was praying. Freedom. For people who had been treated as property their entire lives, that single word meant everything. The slaves who hadn't been called watched with wide eyes, full of regret that they hadn't worked harder. So I gave them something even bigger, a promise. I announced that every month, more than 10 slaves who contributed to the territory would earn their freedom. Work hard, and anyone could become free. Anyone could even own their own land someday. That broke them completely. One by one, they dropped to their knees, shouting, "Great Master," over and over until it became a thundering chorus that echoed across the night sky. These were people who had been numb and broken for years, and now they were alive again, all because someone gave them hope. Even my knights looked stunned. A few of the younger ones seemed confused by how much power a simple promise could have. Standing up on that stone, I felt the weight of it. In my heart, I knew slavery was wrong and needed to end. But I couldn't free everyone at once. That would cause chaos. A reward system made more sense. Free people gradually, keep everyone motivated, and let the territory grow at the same time. The truth was, free citizens and slaves in my territory wouldn't live that differently. Everyone's harvest went into a shared pool that I managed. But having 2 levels gave people something to strive for. Then I turned to my soldiers and knights. I opened several wooden chests filled with thick leather armor and warm boots. In the north, where everyone was cold and poor, good gear was worth more than gold. Soldiers rushed forward, grabbing their new equipment with huge grins. Real leather armor, these boots, the best in the north. They couldn't believe it. Many of them had been patrolling in worn-out boots with frozen feet. Now they had proper gear. I had bought it all in Frostland City ahead of time, knowing from my system exactly what they needed most. After the gifts came the feast. Roasted game animals, golden and dripping with juices, were brought out. Everyone got a piece, even the lowest slaves. Some people cried just from tasting real meat for the first time in years. Music started. A nomad played a bone flute. Women danced around the bonfire. Soldiers laughed and competed to see who could dance the worst. Children ran around in groups, just being kids for once. I watched it all from the highest rock. The dancing, the laughter, the crying. These people had put their hope in me. Every single one of them was counting on me to keep them alive and build something worth living for on this frozen land. I wasn't going to let them down. I put Silco, or Hilco, as he called himself, to work right away. I told him to survey every single person in the territory and find out what they were good at. He wasn't happy about it. He grumbled and complained, but he did the job. What Silco didn't know was that I already knew everything about him. My intelligence system had told me his real story the day I bought him. He was an alchemy apprentice from the Golden Core Guild in the Jade Federation. He'd been hired by some shady figure to steal a secret formula from his mentor. The job went wrong. He had to take the whole document because it was too complicated to memorize. His mentor noticed it was missing, and a bounty went out for his head. Silco panicked, disguised himself as a slave, and tried to escape north with a group of slave traders. But the traders were rough. Every time he caused trouble, they whipped him until he gave up and just acted like a regular slave. Eventually, he ended up at the black market in Frostland City, where I bought him. He thought he'd been sold into another nightmare. But when I found out he could read and do math, I freed him and made him my steward. I could tell he was confused by me, a nobleman who shared food with slaves and burned their contracts. He once muttered that I seemed more like a priest than a lord. I knew he was secretly planning to run away. In his mind, he was a future master alchemist, not some bookkeeper for a border lord in the middle of nowhere. But I wasn't worried. There was nowhere to go out here, and he was too useful to lose. When he finally dropped the finished survey on my desk, he looked half dead from exhaustion. But the work was excellent. The handwriting wasn't perfect, but everything was organized clearly. Names, skills, ages, even notes about who could barely hold a hoe and which children were good at hunting. He had real talent for this kind of work. I decided to keep pretending I didn't know his secret. If I confronted him, he might shut down or try harder to escape. Right now, I needed a capable assistant more than I needed an alchemy apprentice. The territory didn't even have proper buildings yet. What would I do with alchemy? And honestly, if I lost Silco, I'd be buried under that mountain of paperwork myself. No thanks. So I kept quiet and opened the survey book. The results made me smile. My territory had about 1,000 people. Most were farmers and herders, but there were over 100 experienced fishermen, plus dozens of hunters, blacksmiths, carpenters, and tanners. That was more than enough to build a basic self-sufficient community. A territory is like a machine. Every person is a gear, and they need to be in the right place. Put a farmer at a forge and a fisherman in a ditch, and everything slows down. But match people to what they're actually good at, and the whole thing runs smoothly. Now I had the information I needed. The next step was organizing everyone and putting a real development plan into action. I sat down and planned out the future of Crimson Tide territory. Having a system that fed me information was great, but I couldn't rely on it alone to feed 1,000 people. I needed real industries. I called Silco over and started giving orders. First, fishing. I sent 100 fishermen to the river to build a temporary dock and prepare boats. There weren't many fish yet, but once the water warmed up, huge schools would swim upstream to spawn. That catch would become one of our biggest food sources. Down the road, I wanted to set up fish farms too, breed cold water fish instead of depending only on wild ones. Second, farming. I had over 400 farmers start clearing land. I showed Silco on the map where the geothermal spots were. We could use hot spring water to thaw frozen soil and set up irrigation. The ground wasn't the most fertile, but it was workable. I chose rye and potatoes as our first crops since they could handle the cold. For livestock, we barely had anything. A few cattle, sheep, and reindeer. I planned to send people to Frostland City to buy more animals and build a proper livestock area. Third, hunting and security. I had 50+ hunters patrol the forest edges while they hunted. They'd keep watch for monsters and any suspicious outsiders. Fourth, craftsmanship. Leatherworkers would make winter clothes. Blacksmiths would forge farming tools. Carpenters would keep building houses. I wanted them all in one workshop, training apprentices and working together as a real production chain. Silco scribbled everything down, barely keeping up. I could tell his opinion of me was changing. He'd started out thinking I was just a soft-hearted nobleman. But now he was seeing someone who actually knew how to run things. The territory came alive after that. Hunters headed out, fishermen fixed their boats, hammers rang through the camp. The land was waking up. When spring came, most of the north was still frozen. But not our fields. A week earlier, I had ordered people to channel hot spring water into the farmland to melt the ice in the soil. It worked beautifully. The ground turned soft and warm, something northern farmers had never seen in early spring. People couldn't believe it. They knelt down and touched the soil, amazed. Planting crops this early in the north was unheard of. I knew the hot spring water was only a short-term fix. It was salty, and using it too much would eventually ruin the soil. Someday we'd need greenhouses. But for now, it gave us a head start nobody else had. My farm manager was a quiet man named Mick. He'd been just another slave, easy to overlook. But my intelligence system had flagged him as someone with exceptional farming talent, an instinctive understanding of soil, crops, and weather. When I freed him and gave him the job, he couldn't even speak. He just went straight to work. On planting day, Mick tested the soil and confirmed everything was ready. Hundreds of farmers pushed their plows into the ground and were shocked at how soft it was. Some even felt warmth rising from the earth. We spread a special fertilizer I had ordered made earlier, a mix of animal and human manure, straw, fish guts, and crushed gravel powder. It smelled terrible. Eyes watered, noses burned. But nobody complained. They all knew this stuff would make the difference between a good harvest and starvation. Mick told me we could start planting in 4 days. Everything was on track. I left the fields, not because of the smell, but because my daily intelligence system had just updated with 3 new pieces of information that needed my attention right away. My daily intelligence gave me 3 solid pieces of information this time. First, the chieftain of the Cold Moon tribe, a powerful barbarian group that had been raiding the Empire's northern lands for years, had been poisoned and died. His tribe was falling into civil war. That could shake up the whole region, but I was too small to do anything about it right now. All I could do was build my strength and be ready when the storm came. Second, there was a pack of ice wolves at Blue Cliff Rift, and most of them were pups. This was huge. Adult Arctic wolves were nearly impossible to tame, but pups raised from a young age could become loyal war animals. I was pretty sure these were the orphaned cubs of the wolf pack we'd killed on our way here. If I could capture them, Crimson Tide territory would have its own wolf riders someday. Third, a merchant named Jack would be selling cranberry seeds at Frostland City in 4 days. Hidden among them would be a dozen Frostblood Crimson berries, an incredibly rare mutant berry filled with magic energy that could strengthen a knight's bloodline. If I could grow these on a large scale, they'd become the most valuable crop in my entire territory. The problem was, Frostland City was too far for me to reach in time. So I sent Lambert and 2 elite knights ahead on fast horses with orders to get there early and buy every seed Jack had before anyone else could. While I was at it, I wrote a letter home to my father asking for money. I doubted the cold old Duke would care, but it was worth trying. Even a little gold could speed up our development. I sealed it and gave it to Lambert to deliver through our family's trade network. The next morning, I led a group of hunters and knights to Blue Cliff Rift to get those wolf pups. My lead hunter, AG, had sent scouts the night before. They confirmed the adult wolves had lost their leader and the pack was fighting among itself. Only a few old females and about 20 pups remained, hiding in rocky caves. Perfect timing. We split into 2 teams. The first team, knights on horseback, dragged fresh deer meat and blood near the cave entrance to lure the adult wolves out. It worked. 5 big wolves came charging after the bait. The knights led them far from the den, then turned and cut them down in minutes. These were trained fighters with battle energy. The wolves didn't stand a chance. While that was happening, I led the second team into the cave. We lit torches and crept inside. The smell was strong, pure wild animal. Deep in the back, we found them, about 20 wolf pups huddled together, white as snow, shaking with fear. Some of the braver ones tried to growl at us, but they were so small it was more cute than scary. We placed meat coated with calming herbs in front of them. A few hungry pups gave in first, then the rest followed, pushing each other to get their share. Within 2 minutes, the herbs kicked in. The pups got drowsy and wobbly. I told my hunters to be gentle. These weren't just animals. They were the future war wolves of Crimson Tide territory. We needed them healthy and trusting. This was a long game. Tame them right, and someday they'd be one of our greatest weapons. We brought the wolf pups back to camp and placed them in a wooden enclosure I'd had prepared, spacious, with dry grass on the floor and soft nests made of animal hide to make them feel safe. Even so, the pups were scared. They curled up, bared their tiny teeth, and watched us with wide, suspicious eyes. One pup stood out immediately. He was bigger than the rest, with long limbs and a proud look that never wavered. While the others whimpered and hid, this one stood tall and stared right at us without flinching. AEG confirmed what I was already thinking. This was the Wolf King's pup. I named him Lungfeng. I asked AG how we should tame them, partly because I wanted his opinion, partly because I was testing him. My system had already told me he was a natural beast tamer, and I wanted to see it for myself. He didn't disappoint. He laid out a clear plan. Build trust through feeding, establish dominance when they guard food or resist, and most importantly, tame Lungfeng first. In a wolf pack, hierarchy is everything. If the strongest pup accepts me as master, the rest will follow. Then he said something bold. He told me I should tame Lungfeng personally. The other hunters looked shocked, but I liked his honesty. I promoted him on the spot to head of all beast taming in the territory. The old man dropped to one knee, barely able to contain his excitement. Just months ago, he'd been a homeless wanderer nearly freezing to death. Now he had a real purpose. While AEG started working with the pups, I had other things moving too. Lambert and his two knights made it to Frostland City ahead of schedule and found the seed merchant Jack, a small-time southern trader who had come north hoping to get rich. Before Jack could even set up his stall properly, Lambert rode up and bought his entire stock for 5 gold coins. Jack was thrilled. He had no idea he'd just sold a dozen Frostblood Crimsonberry seeds mixed in with ordinary cranberries. Those berries alone could be worth thousands of gold coins. If he ever found out, he'd probably cry. But that was his problem, not mine. Lambert also delivered my letter home to my family's trade office in the city, asking my father for money. I still wasn't sure the old Duke would send anything, but it was worth the attempt. Back at the territory, spring planting was in full swing. I rode through the fields watching hundreds of farmers work the warm, fertilized soil. Everywhere I went, they paused and bowed, not out of fear like in most noble territories, but out of genuine respect. The former slaves looked at me with something extra in their eyes. Hope. They wanted to be noticed. They wanted their chance at freedom. I noticed it all, but kept my feelings to myself. To be honest, I saw everyone in my territory as part of one system. Slaves, free people, they all had a role to play. The reward structure kept them motivated, and I wasn't going to change it until the time was right. Mick, my farm manager, came over with a big smile on his dirt-covered face. He told me the fertilizer was working perfectly and predicted a great harvest. Looking at the dark, rich soil in the plowed fields, I believed him. Things were coming together. Wolf pups being tamed, rare seeds secured, crops going in the ground, and people working harder than ever. Crimson Tide territory was starting to become something real. Mick confirmed our first crops: rye, turnips, and potatoes. All cold-resistant, all fast-growing. If things went well, we'd have our first harvest in 3 months. Rye for flour, turnips for food and animal feed, potatoes for storage and emergencies. It wasn't exciting, but it was smart. Once I figured out greenhouse farming, I'd expand into more crops. For now, survival came first. Standing on the ridge, watching farmers work the dark soil in the sunlight, I felt something I hadn't felt since arriving in this world: real pride. This frozen wasteland was coming alive because of what we built. But while my territory was growing, trouble was brewing nearby. My intelligence system had already told me about the Cold Moon Tribe's chieftain being poisoned. What I didn't know yet was how bad things had gotten. The chieftain's entire family was being slaughtered, his wife, his sons, all killed one by one. Their heads were hung on stone pillars as a warning. Only one person escaped, a girl named Sif, the chieftain's daughter. Her brother Sigurd sacrificed himself, activated his blood fury berserker power, which burned through his own life force, just to buy her time to run south. She was out there somewhere, riding hard through the snow, alone and hunted. I didn't know yet that her path would cross mine, but the system had a way of connecting things. Meanwhile, I had my own business to handle. The river on the west side of my territory was about to come alive. Every spring and autumn, fish swam upstream to spawn. The locals had always known about it, but their methods were primitive, poking at fish with wooden spears or trapping a few in bamboo baskets. They caught barely enough to eat. I changed that. Over the past 2 weeks, I'd put 100 fishermen to work building a proper fishing operation. They hammered wooden stakes into the riverbank to make a dock. Carpenters led teams to build boats. By the end of 2 weeks, we had 10 fishing boats ready to go. Then yesterday, my intelligence system delivered the message I'd been waiting for. A large school of fish would gather in the river tomorrow. I ordered every fisherman to the docks. The next morning, I stood on the dock and looked out at 100 men lined up with nets and spears. I gave them a short speech, reminded them how empty this place was a month ago, how they'd built everything with their own hands, and how today was the day we'd prove that the days of hunger were over. They raised their nets and shouted, "Full loads, together." My fisheries officer, Luke, stood next to me looking nervous. He believed in me. My predictions had always been right, but fishing is unpredictable. He was afraid that if we came back empty-handed, the men would lose morale, and I might take out my anger on someone. Maybe him. I could see the worry on his face, but I stayed calm. I knew what the system had told me. The fish were coming. I told Luke to begin. He took a deep breath and gave the order. The fishermen split into 3 groups, just as I'd planned. The main team took the 10 boats out to the middle of the river, spreading large nets across the water to form a huge barrier. Everything was in position. Now we just had to wait for the river to deliver. The fishing operation went exactly as planned. My 3 teams worked the river perfectly. The main group took 10 boats out and spread large nets across the water, forming a tight circle that trapped the fish inside. The second group cast smaller nets along the shore to catch fish near land. The third group, locals with spears and traps, handled everything else, stabbing fish in the shallows and setting cages on the sandbars. When the nets started filling, the river practically exploded. Huge, fat fish slammed against the nets, jumping out of the water, their scales flashing in the sunlight. The fishermen pulled with everything they had, the boats tilting under the weight. By the time the last net came in, every boat was packed with flopping, splashing fish. The final count came in at over 3,000 fish. The dock erupted. Men were cheering, clapping each other on the back, laughing like they couldn't believe what just happened. Luke, my fisheries officer, looked at me like I was some kind of prophet. He'd been terrified all morning that we'd come back empty-handed and that my speech would look foolish. Now he was staring in amazement. I smiled, but I was already thinking ahead. A big catch means nothing if you waste it. First, I set rules for sustainability. All nets had to have larger holes so young fish could escape and grow. I limited fishing to certain hours each day and declared 1 day per week as a rest day. No fishing at all. I'd seen what overfishing could do in my old world. I wasn't going to drain this river dry for 1 good season. I also started planning fish farms. I wanted to select the best fish as breeding stock and raise them in controlled waters. Wild fishing was great, but depending entirely on nature was risky. A proper fish farm would give us a reliable supply no matter what. Looking at the mountain of fish piled up on the dock, I thought about what to do with all of it. We'd been in Crimson Tide territory for almost a month now. That felt worth celebrating, not just the catch, but everything we'd accomplished. When I arrived, this was a dead, empty land with broken people. Now we had houses, farms, boats, and a real community. The fishermen, craftsmen, and soldiers all deserved recognition. I decided to hold a feast. We'd use some of the fish for the celebration, but the rest had to be preserved. 3,000 fish could feed 1,000 people for days, but winter would come again, and we'd need stored food when the river froze over. Then an idea hit me, a method for preserving fish long-term. Something from my old world that nobody here had tried yet. I wanted to test it right away. In the evening, the sunset bathes red tide territory in warm light. Near the hot springs, a smoking shed has several fish hanging on wooden racks. The fish have golden, slightly wrinkled skin and emit a strong, smoky smell. Lewis stands nearby, examining the fish after hours of smoking. He gently presses the surface with his fingers, satisfied with the dry, firm feel. Sally stands beside him, nervously speaking, her hands twisting together. She looks worried she didn't do a good job. Lewis looks up and praises, "The smoking is good. The texture and color of the fish are very nice." Sally breathes a sigh of relief and shows a small, nervous smile. "It's all thanks to your method. Without your guidance, We couldn't have done it. You're skilled with your hands, Lewis says casually, tearing off a piece of fish and putting it in his mouth. Although the fish meat is dry and tough, the rich smoky aroma slowly spreads in the mouth when chewing, and the taste is quite good. Hirako, standing nearby with crossed arms, yawned tiredly, with dark circles almost falling off his face. It's not that Lewis forced him, but who else in the territory can read and write besides them? So he could only reluctantly work a long schedule. Today, to comfort him, Lewis brought him here to eat fish. Hey, try this. Lewis casually handed over a smoked fish. Hirako's tired eyes showed a hint of interest, and he took a bite. It tastes better than I expected. This is Sally's hard work, Lewis praised. Hearing her name, Sally suddenly became a bit nervous and quickly waved her hands. No, I just followed your instructions to smoke the fish. I don't really know how to do this. Lewis listened quietly to Sally, but his gaze stayed on the smoked fish. The Red Tide territory is located in the cold northern region, where food resources are limited. Fishing is an important supply source, but every winter and early spring, the rivers are almost frozen, and there is little catch. To avoid famine, he needed to find an effective way to preserve food through the long cold winter. So Lewis thought of an innovative method, using geothermal heat to smoke the fish. Hot spring smoked fish? Can that really work? When Hirako first heard about this plan, his eyes were full of disbelief. Compared to just drying, this method can remove more water and extend storage time, Lewis explained. Anyway, this method was worth trying. He chose Sally, who was careful and skillful, to lead the women in an initial attempt. The first step was to prepare the fish. First, cut open the belly and remove the internal organs, but keep the fish skin. The skin not only prevents the fish from falling apart during smoking, but also locks in the aroma, making the smoked fish taste better. Next, salt the fish heavily, for several hours to a day, depending on the weather and humidity. This helps remove the fishy smell, enhance freshness, and remove some water content, preparing for the next step. The second step was to build the smoking rack. In the hot spring area, they wove a row of racks using branches, bamboo, and vines. They also added simple windproof and insulation facilities on both sides of the racks, allowing the hot spring steam to penetrate the fish as much as possible while preventing heat loss. Step 3. The smoking process. Geothermal energy is unstable, so the smoking takes 2 to 3 days and is done in several rounds. If the heat is too high, the fish will become hard. If it's too low, it will be hard to preserve. Therefore, each batch of smoked fish must have its time and temperature carefully adjusted. Although this process seems complicated, Sally has been trying repeatedly and has achieved small success. The fish hanging on the smoking rack is now one of the hopes for winter in the Red Tide territory. Lewis nods slightly. We can now increase the scale. A hint of surprise flashes in Sally's eyes. She and the women under her have worked hard for several days for this. In this world where strength is valued most, women usually have a low status. If they can take on the task of smoking fish, their status in the Red Tide territory will improve a lot. She bites her lip and asks carefully, "My lord, are you saying we will be responsible for smoking the fish? You've already done very well, haven't you?" Lewis looks at her calmly, glancing over the smoking racks. If we expand the scale, experienced people will naturally be in charge. Sally's heart beats faster. She clutches her apron tightly, feeling a sense of security she has never felt before. "Thank you, my lord." She almost instinctively bows, her voice trembling slightly. Lewis smiles. "It's me who should thank you." At this moment, a knight approaches and whispers to Lewis, "Lord Lambert has returned." Lewis's eyes brighten. This is truly good news. He quickly walks toward the residence area to meet the three who have just entered. Lambert kneels on one knee and quietly says, "Mission accomplished." Lewis nods slightly, a look of satisfaction in his eyes. Lambert always gives a feeling of reassurance. "Good work," he says in a deep voice, then glances at the other two elite knights behind him. Although they look a bit tired, no one complains about the journey. "We will hear the detailed report tomorrow," Lewis says with a gentle smile. "Rest well tonight. At tomorrow's awards ceremony, you will all receive the rewards you deserve." The three bow respectfully and reply, "Yes. Leave the seeds here, and you can go rest now." Three knights quickly handed over the package to the servant and left, tired from their journey. using battle energy to travel long distances. Even elite knights can feel exhausted physically and mentally. Lewis watched them leave until their figures disappeared, then turned to walk toward his office, with the servant carrying a large bag of seeds behind him. The seeds were neatly arranged on the desk, showing the results of this purchase. Lewis waved his hand to signal the servant to leave. After the door gently closed, he stepped forward to his desk and found the seeds he wanted using the information system. He gently picked up one seed and examined it. The seed was reddish-brown, smooth on the surface, and looked just like ordinary cranberry seeds. If he didn't have the information system, he might have mistaken it for a common seed. But it was definitely not ordinary. This is the frostblood crimson berry, a special fruit from the cold northern lands that has been affected by magic. Eating it can strengthen the body and improve the knight's battle energy. This means that once cultivated successfully, it could become a unique product of the Red Tide territory. It could also become a strategic resource that noble families would compete for. Lewis looked at the seed as if he saw mountains of gold and silver calling to him. A whole month had passed since Lewis arrived in the Red Tide territory. Now he was standing on a makeshift wooden platform, looking down at the gathered people below. 12 armored knights stood on either side, maintaining neat and uniform postures, making the Lord's figure look more imposing in the firelight. With the sound of a horn breaking the night sky, the Red Tide Territory's commendation ceremony officially began. More than 30 knights knelt on one knee. They placed their left fists over their chests and held their knight's swords in their right hands, reciting the oath Lewis had prepared in advance. We believe in the dragon ancestor and follow the Lord of the Red Tide. Loyal to Lewis Calvin, sworn to defend the glory of the Red Tide with blood and sweat. Their powerful voices echoed across the square. Then, the entire square erupted in deafening cheers. Soldiers struck their shields, farmers raised their hoes and wooden staffs, and even children shouted excitedly. Lewis raised his hand slightly, signaling everyone to be quiet. The noise gradually subsided, and all eyes focused on the young lord. Lewis finally spoke slowly. We have been in the Red Tide territory for a month. A month ago, this place was a barren, empty land. We faced many challenges like poverty, hunger, snowstorms, and wild animal attacks. He paused and looked at the people present. But now, we have overcome the first crisis, thanks to all of you. You built the first shelter to keep warm, so children and the elderly no longer had to sleep outside in the cold. You caught the first fish from the river, filling the stomachs of your brothers and sisters. You cleared the first farmland, planted the first seeds, giving hope to this poor land. All of this is because of you, Lewis said passionately. Your hard work has made this frozen land come alive. Most people in the crowd clenched their fists and their eyes filled with tears from excitement. They had never heard a lord give credit to common people before. It was lucky enough not to be whipped in the past. Lewis looked over the crowd and said, "Of course, there will be rewards for your efforts. In the Red Tide territory, no matter who you are, if you work hard and stay loyal, you will get what you deserve. Next, I want to honor the heroes who made great contributions to the territory." As he finished speaking, the square suddenly became quiet. Everyone held their breath and looked intently at the figure on the high platform. Farmer Mick, the middle-aged man, hunched and stumbling forward, slipped on the wooden steps with his muddy old boots. But when he looked up at the Lord, his previously hunched back straightened. "Mick, you improved farming methods, making this barren land come alive." Lewis pointed to the distant farmland that was beginning to take shape. "Therefore, I officially promote you to agricultural director, giving you greater authority over the farmland, and granting you an extra piece of land for testing new crops." Tears rolled down Mick's face. "Thank you, your lordship." The crowd erupted in applause, and many farmers cheered excitedly. Craftsman Representative Mike, an old man with skin tanned by the sun, strode onto the stage, his face full of pride. "You have shown extraordinary talent in building design, making the houses in the Red Tide territory stronger and warmer, laying a solid foundation for the development of the land." Lewis pointed to the row of semi-underground communal homes around the square. "Therefore, I have decided to give you the authority to lead the craftsmen's team, along with more funding support." Mike trembled with excitement. "Your subordinate will not let you down, Fisherman Luke." Next, about a dozen people were called onto the stage. They had various backgrounds: knights, craftsmen, hunters, farmers. Most of these people came from humble origins, some were even slaves. Lewis stepped forward and personally pinned special labor medals on each awardee. Due to limited resources, it was just a wooden medal carefully carved by a carpenter. However, the recipients held the medals carefully, afraid they might drop them. After the awards, Lewis shouted to the crowd, "These people have contributed their sweat and blood to the prosperity of the Red Tide territory. Let's give them a round of applause." Clap, clap, clap. Thunderous applause suddenly erupted, echoing throughout the square. The awardees straightened their backs, tears of excitement in their eyes. The medals on their chests reflected bright light under the bonfire. They were just ordinary fishermen, hunters, craftsmen, or even lowly slaves. But at this moment, they stood in the spotlight, receiving the highest honor from the Red Tide territory. This was a feeling they had never experienced before in their lives. If Lewis asked them to go through fire and water right now, they would do it without hesitation. Of course, we also want to acknowledge others who have worked hard. Let's give them a round of applause too. As soon as he finished speaking, applause erupted again. This time, it was not just for those on the stage, but for everyone present. Because everyone was contributing in their own way to make the Red Tide territory stronger. Then Lewis's gaze slowly swept over the crowd. Those wearing tattered clothes, still bearing slave marks. They looked down, their eyes shining with a faint light, filled with unease and hope. Today, I will also fulfill another promise. The slaves' hearts beat faster, and the air seemed to freeze for a moment. Next, these people. Lewis began reading a list of names, all of whom had shown outstanding performance in work, construction, and development over the past month. Those whose names were called looked surprised and unable to believe it. It wasn't until someone pushed them gently that they reacted and nervously walked onto the stage. "You are now officially free." Lewis waved his hand, and the knights stepped forward to burn their slave certificates. They immediately burst into tears, knelt down, and bowed their heads to thank Lewis for his kindness. At the same time, the remaining slaves looked on with mixed feelings, some envy, some regret, but mostly hope. They believed that if they behaved better, they might be next time. Loyalty and talent are more important than bloodline. Lewis's voice echoed across the square. From today, the Red Tide territory will establish a regular reward system. Anyone who contributes to the land will receive appropriate rewards. This news made the square lively, and everyone's face shone with hope. Changing social classes was no longer an impossible dream, but a real goal that could be achieved through effort. Cheers to the prosperity of the Red Tide territory. Lewis raised his glass. The strong drink reflected the campfire, casting a fiery glow. Everyone raised their cups and cheered loudly. The smell of grilled fish filled the air. Women carried plates of freshly cooked fish. The villagers sat together, holding their hot fish, eating and chatting, occasionally laughing. "To our great lord," someone shouted loudly. Everyone raised their glasses excitedly and responded, "To our great lord." Clinking glasses and laughter filled the air. Lewis, sitting at the main seat, watched all this with a smile on his face. Compared to the secret fights at noble banquets in the south, he preferred gathering here with ordinary villagers around the campfire, laughing, singing, and dancing. Perhaps feeling a bit tipsy, Lewis casually took a wooden lute handed to him by a knight. His slender fingers plucked the strings, producing a series of clear notes, and he began singing a folk tune from his homeland. "Earth, snowdrop, snowdrop, opening in the morning breeze. Bless my hometown forever." The square suddenly fell silent, everyone listening intently, as if transported to that distant place. When the last note fell, the cheers erupted like a tidal wave. "One more song," someone shouted enthusiastically. "Lord, you sang so well. One more song." "Cheers to the Lord." Everyone in the square joined in the cheer. Even the most reserved knights couldn't help but smile. Lewis shook his head and chuckled, casually grabbing a piece of roasted fish and taking a bite, letting the joyful sounds drift into the night. The next morning, Lewis woke up to sunlight shining through the curtains, and the air still carried the smell of last night's campfire smoke. "Maybe I drank too much," he muttered, rubbing his temples with a tired sigh. Usually, he wakes before dawn to practice breathing techniques and cultivate his fighting spirit. But last night was so fun that he slept in this morning, which was rare for him. He instinctively reached out to check his side of the bed, relieved to find it empty on the other side. Good, he hadn't made a mistake. After washing up, Lewis sat cross-legged on the bed, took a deep breath, and slowly started practicing the tide breathing technique. The fighting spirit flowed along his blood vessels, but he could clearly feel it was stuck. He was still at the bottleneck, an intermediate knight, unable to advance. Damn it, when will I break through? He had been training very strictly, but his talent was too average. Relying solely on training to improve was much harder for him than for others. If only he could find something like the North Crystal Cod again. Useless system, give me some strength. He thought helplessly, then casually opened the information system to see what news was worth noting today. 1. After the banquet, the farm officer Mick proposed to Tanya and succeeded. 2. The young wolf Cold Wind from the ice plain defeated all the pups raised by the Red Tide leader and became their wolf king. 3. Princess Shifu of the Cold Moon tribe fled to the Red Tide territory, exhausted and starving, and fainted in the wilderness. She will be eaten by passing frost bears at 5 p.m. today. The first piece of news made him raise an eyebrow. Mick, that old guy, actually got a marriage proposal? This farm officer spends all his time with soil, thinking about how to improve land and increase harvests. I didn't expect him to quietly handle such a big matter. Tanya, he remembers her, an indigenous widow in her early 30s with 3 children. She is strong-willed and capable. It's quite surprising that Mick managed to win her over. Well, congratulations. It seems the population of the Red Tide territory will grow again, he said with a light smile, feeling happy for his old friend. The second piece of news was exactly what he expected. Cold Wind truly did not disappoint. Among the young wolves, he stood out and became the Wolf King. Lewis had believed in him from the start. This young wolf naturally has a proud, kingly aura. In terms of size, expression, and eyes, he is different from other Arctic wolf pups his age. Becoming the leader of the pack was no surprise. Good, Lewis nodded with satisfaction. This is the fighting wolf I chose. But when his eyes fell on the third piece of news, his smile suddenly disappeared. The little princess of the Cold Moon tribe, Sif? She ran away to the Red Tide territory? This news made Lewis feel uneasy. He had been receiving daily updates about the Cold Moon tribe. Since the old chief died, the tribe has fallen into chaos. The old chief's family was eliminated, the elders lost authority, and the leaders each pulled in their own supporters, leading to fierce faction fights. If I had to describe it in one sentence, it would be, the Cold Moon tribe is a complete mess. But even so, Lewis didn't expect that the tribe's little princess would run away to the Red Tide territory and faint there. What's worse, at 5 p.m., she would be eaten by the frost-white bear. What's going on? Lewis rubbed his forehead and sighed. He only had 2 choices, save her or not. He hesitated for a long time, tapping lightly on the table with his fingers. The situation with the Cold Moon tribe was extremely complicated. Sif's appearance might trigger a series of unknown problems. Moreover, she was unconscious in the wilderness, and at 5 o'clock, she would become the frost-white bear's dinner. If she died, it would be over, and it had nothing to do with him. But in the end, Lewis decided to act. First, since Sif has already escaped near the Red Tide territory, it shows she is far from the power struggles of the Cold Moon tribe. Rescuing her is not very risky. Second, although he is not a saint, his simple values make him unable to stand by and do nothing. An innocent girl, regardless of her background, if he has the ability to save her, he cannot just watch her die. Otherwise, he would feel guilty forever. Third, even though this idea is very distant and unrealistic, what if someday he becomes strong enough to use Sif's name to control the Cold Moon tribe? Of course, it's too early to think about this now. In short, based on reason, kindness, and a little bit of hope, Lewis made a decision. To save her, Lambert, Lewis called his loyal knight. Lambert quickly entered and bowed respectfully. My lord? I'm going hunting. Prepare everything, Lewis said casually. Lambert was slightly surprised and looked at the lord with some astonishment. Since arriving at the Red Tide territory, this young lord has been busy with his land all day long. He didn't even have time for morning walks. Yet today he suddenly wanted to go hunting with enthusiasm. But as a good servant, Lambert didn't ask much. He simply nodded and said, understood. I will arrange for hunters and knights. Although spring had arrived in the north, the cold wind was still biting. Sif's hands clenched the reins tightly, her fingertips numb. The horse beneath her was panting heavily, its hooves stumbling, and the sweat on its body was quickly turning to frost in the cold night. Almost. Faster. Behind her, the flames of the Cold Moon tribe's fire burned brightly, a result of her brother's sacrifice of his life. She couldn't turn back, couldn't stop. Run south, never come back. Sigur's angry shout still echoed in her mind, like a nail hammered deep into her soul. Sigur was dead, her father, mother, and siblings all perished, and she was left alive, a lost soul wandering in this world with no home. No destination, only fleeing southward. Food was long gone. Sif could only drink from the river and survive on bark and a few wild fruits. A few days later, the warhorse finally grew tired and collapsed with a loud neigh. Sif also tumbled off the horse and fell heavily to the ground. She wanted to stand up, but she couldn't even move her fingers. Her consciousness gradually faded, and Sigurd's face appeared in her mind. "Sorry, brother. I can't go on." Her vision blurred, and Sif's awareness sank into darkness. A large group of Red Tide soldiers was moving north. The hunters looked focused, and the knights were alert, watching all around, each eager to do well in the hunt. After all, this hunt was personally led by the Lord himself. Lewis, wrapped in a thick wolf fur cloak, rode his horse slowly and steadily. On the barren land, there were a series of scattered animal tracks. An experienced hunter immediately crouched down to examine them and whispered, "My lord, there are signs of rabbits nearby, and more than one." Lewis nodded gently, drew his short bow from his waist, nocked an arrow, and squinted ahead. Sure enough, near a patch of withered grass, a gray-white rabbit was cautiously poking its head out. The arrow shot through the air so fast, it was almost invisible, hitting the rabbit's neck precisely. The rabbit twitched once, then went still. Excellent marksmanship, truly worthy of the Lord. The hunters and knights immediately clapped and praised, flattering him. "Your lordship is both wise and brave, even hunting so accurately. Such archery skills. I dare say even the royal hunters would be envious. If we had 100 such sharpshooters in the northern province, we wouldn't fear barbarian invasions. Yes, yes. Truly a born warrior." Some knights even carried the rabbit to Lewis with admiration, saying, "My lord, could this rabbit be a descendant of the king of beasts? Otherwise, how could it be so hard to shoot?" Lewis's mouth twitched slightly. These people really know how to talk. But he didn't mind. After all, the Lord's authority and reputation sometimes had to be built on these small, legendary stories. Of course, this hunt was just a cover story. The real target was the little princess about to be swallowed by the icy white bear. Using hunting as an excuse to head north to find someone, Lewis simply didn't want others to know he had a prophetic ability. Of course, Lewis also knew that some clever people around him had already started to notice something unusual. They weren't fools. They had long suspected that their lord was too lucky. Since arriving in the northern province from the south, he could accurately predict all kinds of dangers and opportunities. If someone said it was just a coincidence, no one would believe it. But in this fantasy world, even if Lewis told them directly that he had a daily intelligence system, they wouldn't understand what those 6 words meant, since there are no internet stories here. So they just attributed all of this to the divine favor of the dragon ancestor. "This harvest is truly great. Lord, your archery skills are amazing." "Exactly. Today, even the dragon ancestor seems to be blessing us. Haha. When we get back, we must celebrate properly." Thus, as they joked and talked, the team continued their journey, gaining many rewards along the way. The hunters shot several fat deer and even caught some rare cold region fish near the ice river. Sometimes relaxing like this feels pretty good, Lewis thought, smiling as he watched everyone happily. Suddenly, a scout hunter hurried back to the group, looking strange. "Lord, we found a girl ahead." His words made the entire hunting team fall silent, all looking at him with confusion. "A girl?" Lambert frowned. How could there be a girl in the wilderness, not far ahead, near the ice river? The hunter panted, still a little scared. "She was lying in the snow. Looks like she's unconscious." Lewis's eyes flickered slightly, but he kept a calm expression. "Lead the way." When they crossed a small grove and approached the ice river, they found the unconscious girl, Schiff. She was lying face up on the cold snow, curled slightly, with messy white short hair scattered by the wind and snow. Her fur coat was old and torn, with her shoulders and arms exposed to the air, turning purple from the cold. A few unhealed wounds showed the hardships she had endured in the past few days. Despite her delicate face, she still carried a stubborn look. Even in unconsciousness, she appeared strong and not weak at all. An experienced hunter leaned over to observe her for a moment, his face changing. "My lord, she is from the northern tribe." Another hunter looked closely at the patterns on her belt and quietly added, "The Cold Moon tribe." The air suddenly grew quiet for a few seconds. The surrounding knights couldn't help but exchange glances. The Cold Moon tribe is a major enemy of the northern province. But Lewis only took a quick look and made a decision. Take her back for treatment. The knights didn't hesitate. They quickly lifted the girl carefully onto a warhorse. The hunters, with a full cart of game, set out on their journey home. Back at the Red Tide territory, the girl was taken to an empty room and handed over to a native healer with some medical knowledge. Lewis was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on her face. She was now with her eyes tightly closed, her lips cracked from the cold, her brows slightly furrowed, as if fighting against death itself. Lewis took out a bottle of life potion from his family's supplies and handed it to the healer. "Give this to her." The healer paused slightly, but then slowly poured the potion into her mouth. After a while, her pale face seemed to regain a little color, and her breathing became steadier. Although she was still unconscious, it seemed her life had been saved. A bottle of life potion is quite expensive. "Hopefully, she will wake up," Lewis said as he looked at the girl. If only someone in our territory knew how to use magic soil," Lewis said casually from behind his desk, tapping his fingers on the surface. But his eyes kept glancing at Hilko, sitting at the small desk nearby. Hilko was focused on writing quickly, recording the catch and smoked fish production. His dark circles were even worse than last night. When he heard Lewis's complaint, he suddenly stopped writing, pressed his fingers to his temples, and tried to wake himself up. No, this couldn't be a hallucination. Because this was the 5th time today he heard Lewis say that. Even if he was sleep-deprived, he shouldn't be hearing hallucinations 5 times, right? Hilko's hand paused slightly, finally confirming one thing. This clearly is a deliberate hint about himself. Making magical soil is a basic skill every alchemist learns. And he, being a genius in alchemy, naturally understands this. But the problem is, he has never revealed this part of his identity to anyone, at least not in the Red Tide territory. So, how does Lewis know? His mind races quickly, trying to remember if he accidentally let something slip before. Or maybe, he simply can't hide his natural talent for alchemy? While he was thinking, Lewis spoke again, still sounding helpless. "It would be great if I could make the magical soil myself." This was the 6th time he said that. Lewis kept repeating like a monk chanting, and Hilko finally couldn't take it anymore. He took a deep breath and pretended to be calm as he said, "I know a little. I learned some at the church school before." As soon as he finished, Hilko wanted to slap himself. What a lie! How could the church school teach how to make magical soil? But Lewis seemed to believe this explanation completely, even showing a look of sudden realization. He asked with interest, "Oh, is that so? Can you help me then?" Inside the office, the atmosphere fell into a tense silence. Does he really believe it? Hilko subtly glanced at Lewis. From his expression, it didn't look like he was fooled. Instead, it seemed like he was finally admitting the truth, eagerly waiting for Hilko to prepare the magical soil. Hilko. Of course, Lewis knew about Hilko's identity as an apprentice alchemist. Plants like frost blood crimson berries must grow in highly acidic soil. Only then can they absorb nutrients efficiently, making the fruit full, bright red, and better at boosting combat energy. If the soil is neutral or alkaline, nutrients get locked in, causing poor plant growth, yellowing leaves, or even no fruit at all. But the problem is how to prepare acidic soil. Lewis only has a rough idea and doesn't know the exact ratios or methods. However, he knew who could do it. Hilko, the guy hiding his apprentice alchemist identity. Lewis wanted to wait for Hilko to speak first, but the situation was urgent, and the frost blood crimson berries couldn't be delayed. Unfortunately, today he had to reveal himself. Silence spread between the two, and the fire in the fireplace crackled. Hilko looked down at his ledger on the table, thinking about the pros and cons. Finally, he sighed slowly, as if he had accepted his fate. All right, but I have one condition. Let me take a day off each week. This time, Lewis was silent. For the currently short-staffed Red Tide clan, it did feel like a waste of talent. He hadn't taken a day off in a month. But on the other hand, if Hilko continued working at this pace, he might collapse someday. Lewis sighed. Fine, deal. Then Hilko handed Lewis a list of materials needed for magic soil. Most of the materials could be bought at the Frost Spear City Market. But one name caught Lewis's eye for a moment. You really are brave to bring that up. Lewis chuckled and looked up at Hilko. I just listed the standard recipe. Hilko shrugged. Of course, you can use substitutes, but the effect might. No magic marrow. Then the magic soil's effect will be greatly reduced, Lewis said directly. Hilko spread his hands and said nothing. Lewis rubbed his forehead. Magic marrow was indeed a bit expensive. The Red Tide clan did have some, located in the northwest mining area. But mining there was a little tricky. Technically, it was not too difficult. Using rough methods, even just hitting the veins with iron picks, they could extract some for making magic soil. But the real problem wasn't here. According to intelligence reports, a few frost giants had been wandering near the mines since early spring. Frost giants were among the most troublesome monsters in the northern lands. They usually lived in extremely cold places, were huge and incredibly strong, with skin as hard as ice, making it difficult for ordinary weapons to harm them effectively. What's more, they could control cold air, creating freezing storms over the battlefield, slowing down enemies or freezing them to death. Lewis hadn't rushed to deal with this issue before, partly because the Red Tide clan was still developing, focusing on farming and production, and had no time to worry about the mines. On the other hand, the mining area was far from the residents, so the giants did not pose a real threat to the territory. At that time, there was little knowledge about the frost giants, and rushing to attack was very risky. Therefore, he only sent a few knights to secretly observe and gather more information. But now the situation has changed. In recent months, the intelligence system has provided some information about the weaknesses of the frost giants. The territory's development has also stabilized, and it is time to take action to eliminate this hidden danger. Since mining the magic marrow is necessary, it is also a good opportunity to clear out the mining area and fully control these resources for the Crimson Tide territory. Lewis thought for a moment and immediately began to act. He first summoned 2 knights and handed them Hilko's list. Go to Frost Spear City to buy alchemy materials according to this list. The sooner, the better. Yes. The knights took the list and hurried away. Then he called the knight Captain Lambert and said, Lambert, gather all the knights and prepare for battle. Lambert was slightly surprised but asked no questions. He responded in a serious tone, Understood, my lord. The target is the Northwest Mountains to defeat the frost giants, Lewis said firmly. Make sure everyone is assembled properly. Yes, Lambert replied decisively, then stood up and left quickly. Soon, the Knights of the Crimson Tide had gathered swiftly. Their horses neighed loudly as they headed toward the mining area in the northwest of the territory. Lewis stood on a hidden rocky outcrop, overlooking an open area in the valley below. For frost giants were throwing huge stones, then using massive ice stone clubs to send the stones flying, having fun. Are they playing baseball? Lewis muttered, but he remained alert. These enormous creatures were about 5 meters tall, covered in natural armor made of ice crystals and rock fragments. Just looking at their muscular, rugged bodies was enough to remind one of terrifying brute strength. Their ice stone clubs, about 6 meters long, could leave deep cracks in the ground when swung. Even more frightening was the pale blue cold mist surrounding the frost giants, which was their extreme cold domain. If an ordinary person got too close, their blood circulation would slow down, or they might even freeze into ice sculptures. Fortunately, there are only 4 of them. If there had been 40, Lewis would have had to carry the Red Tide leader and run away overnight. Are we nervous? Not really. He already knew the weaknesses of the frost giants and had set traps in advance. Plus, this time he brought most of the knights from the Red Tide leader and over 100 soldiers. 53 knights against 4 frost giants. It's an advantage for us. Is everyone ready? Lewis asked quietly. Yes, sir. Everyone is in position, the commander replied. Good, Lewis nodded slightly. Follow the plan. Let these big guys taste our tactics. He slowly raised his right hand, fingers together. "Move out!" The commander waved the large flag, and the knights hiding in different places moved at the same time. A sharp arrow shot across the sky, trailing flames in a red trail, hitting the frost giants. Startled by the sudden attack, the four giants paused, then roared loudly. They stomped the ground with their huge feet and angrily headed toward the flames. "Separate them," Lambert shouted. The knights split into four groups, attacking the giants from different directions, using long spears to provoke them. Each attack hit the giants' most sensitive spots: knees, faces, between fingers, and underarms. The giants roared, swinging ice rock clubs to crush these tiny enemies. But the knights were prepared. They quickly retreated, using the terrain and speed to delay the giants and guide them into the trap areas. After a few minutes, the four giants were completely separated and entered different trap zones. The waiting trap team suddenly threw out heavy rope nets. The heavy ropes wrapped tightly around the giants' legs. The giants' steps slowed. They struggled to tear free from the bindings. Hidden knights on the sides quickly rushed forward, stabbing their sharp spears or swords into the weak joints behind the giants' knees. The spears pierced their cold flesh. Here, the ice armor was the thinnest. Each strike made the giants roar loudly in pain, staggering back in agony. "Retreat, change positions." The warriors quickly dispersed in different directions, avoiding giving the giants a chance to fight back. The giant let out a painful roar and knelt down, its struggling movements slowing suddenly. Meanwhile, hidden soldiers threw torches fiercely, flames licking the giant's tough ice armor. Soon, the cold aura began to weaken, and the surface of the ice armor started cracking from the heat. Archers took the chance to shoot flaming arrows, which cut through the night sky and aimed at the giant's face. Several arrows hit its eyes and cheeks accurately, and the flames scorched its flesh. Roar, the giant painfully covered its face and struggled violently. "Knights, get ready. Target the heart and throat." The knights activated their fighting spirit, which burned bright red on their swords and spears. They spurred their horses forward, like sharp red blades, aiming to strike the giant's heart and throat. Blood splattered as the first giant let out a final scream and collapsed with a loud crash. Of course, not all groups had such luck. Suddenly, a deafening roar came from a trap area. Roar, it was an especially furious frost giant, breaking free from the rope net. Its thick legs stomped with force, causing the trap-filled ground to crack and stones to fly. "Oh no, this trap can't hold it at all." The leading knight's face changed. Just as he was about to order his team to surround it again, the giant was already furious. It suddenly spread its arms wide and roared at the sky, its icy aura rising sharply. A violent frost storm swept out in all directions. The storm carried countless sharp ice blades, covering the entire area instantly. The cold wind tore through the land, knocking the knights over unexpectedly. Two novice knights were caught in the storm, their armor quickly covered with thick ice, freezing them stiff. Then, the storm suddenly pulled them away, throwing them forcefully against the rocks, rendering them unable to fight. Another knight, caught off guard, was struck by the giant's massive club. He was flung dozens of meters away like a broken kite, crashing heavily to the ground and spitting blood. The scene fell into chaos. But just as the frost giant prepared to swing its club again, a streak of red fighting spirit suddenly cut through the snowstorm, directly striking the giant's wrist. The blazing sword energy tore a long wound across the giant's cold iron muscles, causing deep blue blood to spray out and freeze into ice crystals on the snow. "Cut its leg," Lambert shouted angrily, raising his great sword high, infused with strong fighting spirit, aiming straight at the giant's knee. Two elite knights followed closely, forming a triangle attack formation, rushing toward the giant. "Charge!" Lambert's great sword struck down hard, targeting the joint behind the giant's knee. This strike embedded deeply into the icy armor, slicing through tendons. The giant's massive body trembled violently, almost kneeling. Another elite knight leapt up, his sword burning with fiery fighting spirit, stabbing fiercely into the giant's ribs. The last knight swung forcefully at the giant's ankle, trying to completely throw off its balance. The three strikes hit simultaneously. The giant, overwhelmed by pain, roared loudly, tearing the sky with its cry, and tried to swing its club again to fight back. "Stop it!" Lambert shouted angrily, stomping hard on the ground to leap again. He swung his great sword in a reverse slash, accurately cutting at the giant's wrist joint. A clear cracking sound was heard. The giant's grip on the club suddenly loosened. The huge ice rock club slipped from its fingers and crashed heavily onto the ground, sending a shower of ice shards into the air. Now, the knights behind raised their spears high. With a deafening roar, all their weapons pierced into the giant's vital points at the same time. Puff, 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 puff. Ice-cold blood splattered, staining the snow. The enraged giant could no longer hold on. Its enormous body collapsed with a thunderous crash, completely lifeless. The corpse of the frost giant lay sprawled on the ground, its massive body lifeless, with a strong smell of blood in the air. Soldiers hurriedly tidied up the battlefield, while the knights tended to their comrades' injuries. Fortunately, they were well prepared, and casualties were not serious. Most people only suffered minor frostbite or cuts, which could be treated with the ointments and bandages they carried. A few doctors worked nearby, bandaging wounds and applying warm medicine to prevent the cold from spreading. However, one knight, who had been knocked flying by the furious frost giant, was in very serious condition. His face was pale, blood dripped from the corner of his mouth, his armor was shattered by the giant, and his chest was deeply sunken. It is clear that his ribs are broken, and his internal organs are likely badly injured. Although he is still breathing faintly, it is uncertain whether he can survive. The doctor kneels beside him, looking serious. His injuries are too severe. Normal treatment can't save him. The surrounding knights look worried. This is their comrade. They had fought side by side just moments ago, and now he lies here barely alive. We can't let him die. Everyone looks up and sees Lewis standing nearby. He slowly takes out a deep green crystal bottle from his coat, and the liquid inside emits a faint glow. This is a very rare life potion, which can quickly heal wounds and even save someone close to death. Even nobles value this potion highly. They only use it when absolutely necessary. Lewis doesn't say much. He kneels on one knee and carefully pours the potion into the injured man's mouth. As the potion enters, a miracle begins. His weak breathing gradually steadies, and a hint of color returns to his pale cheeks. His sunken chest slowly rises and falls. Broken bones start to heal, and torn internal organs begin to recover. His nearly stopped heartbeat regains strength. Life returns to this dying knight. His life is no longer in danger. The doctor breathes a sigh of relief. But how much he can recover depends on his fate. The knights watch this scene with complex expressions. They look at Lewis with admiration. They didn't expect him to use such a precious potion on a knight. Their loyalty to Lewis deepens. 111. Lord, Lambert whispers, you shouldn't waste such a potion on him. Lewis stands up and smiles calmly. He fought for me, for the Red Tide leader. Using it on him isn't a waste. His gaze sweeps over everyone present, and his voice is firm. I will not give up on those who serve me. For a moment, all the knights straighten their backs in silence. They lower their heads, clutch their chests, and respond with knightly salutes. No words are spoken, but their resolve is stronger than any vow. Actually, Lewis also feels sad about this potion. It was a life-saving potion his sister, who is both his biological sibling, secretly gave him before heading to the northern border. There are only 3 bottles in total. The first bottle was given to the unconscious chef. The second bottle was given to the severely injured knight. Now, he only has 1 bottle left. Thinking about this, he feels mixed emotions. It's not just sadness. This is life-saving medicine. If he keeps it for himself, it might save his own life in a critical moment. But he used it anyway, and he doesn't regret it. He saved Chef, and maybe someday, this little princess from the Cold Moon tribe will bring some value. He also saved the knight, showing the soldiers of the Red Tide that their leader won't abandon them easily, helping them stay united. Forget it, I'll keep the last bottle for myself. Lewis sighed softly, casually putting the empty bottle into his pocket. Next comes the reward ceremony. Lewis stands seriously in front of everyone, personally handing out awards to those who contributed as their leader. This time, we defeated 4 ice giants. Everyone has contributed. If it were another leader, they might not hold a ceremony like this, but I believe that effort should be rewarded. He pauses, looking at the expectant faces, and a slight twitch appears at the corner of his mouth. However, well, I think you all know, I am truly poor. The soldiers look at each other, then burst into laughter. Lewis shrugs helplessly. But since you've made achievements, you should get some benefits. As he speaks, cheers and applause erupt around the scene. The rewards are simple: fresh fish, game, grains, and a small amount of gold coins. Yet no one shows dissatisfaction. They all understand that Lewis has done enough. He is not a leader who only makes empty promises. He is willing to save his soldiers. He is willing, even when short on resources, to give rewards after their bloody battles. Moreover, most leaders would not give any rewards after fighting against monsters or enemies, just a simple return home as a reward. But Lewis is different. Their leader personally recognizes their efforts and promises to give more rewards in the future. That is what they value most. Serving under the leader is our honor. May the dragon ancestor bless the Red Tide territory. All the soldiers and knights accepted the reward without complaints, even feeling grateful. They happily took the modest reward, their faces showing satisfied smiles. As for what to do with the giant corpses, that was a problem. The northern border lacked food, and every piece of meat was very precious. Usually, normal prey would be skinned, the meat taken, and then smoked or dried for preservation. But frost giants are humanoid creatures. Lewis looked at the huge bodies with some reluctance. Moreover, although the Red Tide territory had limited supplies, it was not to the point of needing to rely on such methods to fill their stomachs. Do not eat them. Bring all the bodies back for processing, he ordered decisively. The knights had no objections. Their lord always acted according to principles. However, abandoning the bodies seemed wasteful. After all, these frost giants' bodies contained a lot of cold energy, and even in death, their flesh was rich in special nutrients. Thinking of this, Lewis suddenly had an idea. Since we can't eat them, let's make good use of them. We can turn them into fertilizer. Fertilizer? Lambert was slightly surprised, then nodded thoughtfully. That was a good idea. The giant's blood and flesh were rich in magical elements. With proper processing, it could greatly improve the poor soil of the Red Tide territory. Take them back and give them to the farm steward, Mike, for processing. The soldiers then began clearing the battlefield, dragging the giant bodies on simple wooden frames and slowly transporting them back to the territory. As the frost giants' bodies were taken away, the bloody smell on the battlefield gradually faded. But for Lewis, the real goal of this operation was just beginning: mining the magic marrow. Magic marrow, as a core material for explosive alchemy, was very rare. Even in the entire northern border, and throughout the Iron Blood Empire, such deposits were few and far between. Fortunately, these deposits were buried very deep, so they had not been discovered before. Otherwise, Lewis wouldn't have found them. And if it weren't for the daily intelligence reports, Lewis would never have been able to locate them. The knights guarded the perimeter, while a group of villagers, armed with iron picks, gloves, and simple protective gear, cautiously entered the mining area to begin mining carefully. Shovels of broken stones were dug up, accompanied by a crisp, clang sound. Finally, a corner of the deep purple crystal hidden beneath the mineral layer was revealed. It was a mineral that emitted a faint glow, radiating mysterious energy. Take a small sample first, and follow Hilco's advice to adjust the magic soil formula, Lewis ordered. Keep the rest sealed for now. He was not in a hurry to start large-scale mining. After all, this required skilled workers, reinforced tunnels, mining techniques, and alchemy refining, none of which could be easily handled. In a letter he sent to his father earlier, he specifically mentioned these needs. If his father was willing to send experts to help, that would be the best situation. Otherwise, Lewis would have to find experienced craftsmen from outside himself. Spring sunshine spilled over the farmland of the Crimson Tide territory, and a gentle breeze carried the fresh scent of new buds. Lewis stood on a high spot, looking down at the land that was gradually coming back to life. Just a few weeks ago, this was a barren field just planted. Now, the black wheat had sprouted, potato shoots peeked out of the ground, and the young turnip plants swayed gently in the wind. It looks like this year's harvest won't be too bad, he thought with a satisfied smile. Suddenly, hurried footsteps sounded from afar. Mick ran over quickly, looking a bit nervous. Although he had successfully proposed marriage, He had not yet formally reported to the Lord. As a former slave, Mick still harbored some fear of his master. Now that he was a free man, he still believed that major life decisions needed his master's approval. What if Lewis didn't agree? What if he disapproved? These thoughts swirled in Mick's mind, making his steps heavier than usual. But before he could speak, Lewis gave a gentle smile and said loudly, "Mick, congratulations on your successful proposal." Mick was stunned. He hadn't even spoken yet. How did the Lord know? Shock, fear, disbelief. Various emotions swirled in his heart. He even instinctively wanted to kneel. But a fair hand supported him. Lewis frowned slightly and said firmly, "Mick, you are now the chief of agriculture. Don't kneel so easily anymore." Mike suddenly came back to himself, his eyes slightly reddened. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by a gift Lewis handed him. It was 2 smoked fish, tied together with a thin string, even with a crooked bow. Mike froze in surprise. "This is a gift," Lewis said calmly. "Although I am a bit short on money lately, I think I should give you something to celebrate." Mike tightly held the gift, his lips trembling. Finally, he couldn't hold back and tears fell down his face. He never thought he would receive such a blessing from the Lord. He had thought he needed to carefully ask for the Lord's approval, maybe face criticism, or be asked to pay a price. "Don't cry," Lewis patted Mike on the shoulder. "Isn't this a good thing?" Mike sniffed and nodded hard, trying to calm himself. "All right, calm down. I have something important to talk to you about." Hearing this, Mike took a deep breath, wiped his tears, and stood straight. "Please, tell me what to do." Lewis slightly tilted his head, signaling him to look behind. Mike instinctively looked in that direction, then his eyes widened suddenly, and he gasped. For huge bodies lay by the farmland. Their broken bodies were cut into many pieces, frost-covered skin beginning to melt, revealing dark blue flesh. Such big bodies. Mike swallowed hard, struggling to find his voice after a long moment. "Don't be stunned. I want you to turn these bodies into fertilizer," Lewis said with a smile. Fertilizer? Mike almost bit his tongue in shock. He had never heard of using frost giant corpses as fertilizer before. Lewis's tone was matter-of-fact. "Frost giants' muscles are rich in minerals. Use them well. Maybe it will bring great benefits to the crops." Mike's mouth twitched, but his mind was already racing, thinking about how to handle these 4 fertilizer piles. But just as his shock was not fully gone, Lewis's next words made his nerves tighten again. "And this?" Lewis took out a small cloth bag from his pocket and handed it to Mike with seriousness. The bag contained half of the frostblood crimson berry seeds. Because they were so precious, Lewis didn't dare to take any risks and decided to test grow only a small part first. He gave the seeds to Mick because the intelligence system had once said that Mick had an amazing talent for planting. Lewis believed that if he shared the planting method with Mick, Mick could grow them much better than he could. Mick quickly reached out and carefully opened the bag. The seeds looked like ordinary fruit seeds. "These are," he stammered, "frostblood crimson berry seeds," Lewis said without much explanation. "They are very valuable. Each seed is worth hundreds of gold coins." Mick's eyes widened suddenly, and his breathing became quick. One seed could buy hundreds of slaves like him. "You're going to give me these to handle?" Mick's hands trembled a little, worried he might accidentally ruin these precious seeds. Lewis nodded and said, "These seeds are very rare. They need careful care to grow. If you have any problems, just come to me. I've already asked someone to find the right magic soil formula, but it will take some time. For now, your task is to bury these seeds in the ice and activate their vitality." Yes. Mick hurriedly took the seeds with care. "I will take good care of them and make sure they aren't damaged in any way." At that moment, a guard hurried over and said to Lewis, "Sir, the girl we rescued earlier has woken up." Her consciousness drifted between chaos and reality, like sinking into the deep sea and being slowly pulled back to the surface. Shiv slowly opened her eyes. Her blurry vision gradually became clear. What she saw was an unfamiliar wooden ceiling, with a faint smell of smoke and fire in the air. Her body was wrapped in warm bedding, and she could clearly feel the comfortable warmth on her skin. Instinctively, she looked around quickly. It was a wooden cabin, with simple but tidy walls and beams, a few plain wooden tables and chairs, and a fireplace burning with a warm glow. Fortunately, there were no chains or obvious weapons, so she wasn't imprisoned. Shiv tried to turn over, but she felt her body was completely unresponsive, so weak that even moving slightly was extremely difficult. Oh no, her body wouldn't move at all. Her heart sank at this realization. Then, painful memories flooded her mind like a tide. The fall of the Cold Moon tribe. Brothers, sisters, and parents all died tragically because of betrayal. The eldest brother sacrificed himself to protect her and escape, dying alongside the enemies. She closed her eyes, overwhelmed with sadness. It felt as if a heavy stone was pressing on her chest, making it hard to breathe. At least I am still alive, and I have a chance to get revenge. She clenched her teeth, fought back tears, and tried to calm her emotions. Just then, the wooden door creaked open. Sif suddenly opened her eyes, alert and watching the door carefully. She thought she would see unfamiliar soldiers, nobles, or the ruthless killers of her people. But instead, a thin, middle-aged woman entered. She looked to be in her 40s, with wrinkles on her face. She wore simple cotton clothes and carried a tray with a bowl of porridge and a cup of warm water. The steam carried a faint smell of food. Seeing Sif awake, the woman's eyes lit up with surprise. "Oh, you've finally woken up. You're very lucky." The woman gently lifted Sif's upper body and let her lean on a soft pillow. Then she took a cup of warm water and slowly brought it to her lips, speaking softly. "Drink some water first to soothe your throat. You've been asleep for several days." After a moment of hesitation, Sif finally slightly opened her mouth, allowing the woman to bring the cup closer. The warm water flowed into her mouth, easing the burning sensation in her throat. Sif couldn't help but swallow gently, and her mind gradually cleared as the water refreshed her. "Take it slow, don't rush," the woman said with a gentle tone, showing some concern. "Poor child, you must have suffered a lot." Sif's eyelashes fluttered slightly, and a dark emotion flickered in her eyes, but she didn't speak. "If it weren't for the Lord sending someone to save you, you might have been taken by wild animals." The woman patted her back and started to chatter on her own. Hearing this, Sif lowered her gaze slightly, her fingertips tightening quietly. The noble from the south? A warning rose in her heart, but her face remained silent. The woman didn't notice her change in mood and continued talking happily. "Don't be afraid. Our Lord is young, but he's a remarkable person. He's kind-hearted and can't stand to see anyone suffer. You don't know, do you? He even saves injured slaves. We refugees have received a lot of help from him." She spoke casually, but Sif felt more and more uneasy inside. She was actually taken in by a noble from the southern barbarians. Since she was young, she had heard countless stories about the empire. They are cunning invaders, cold and ruthless, using lies to deceive the weak, and mercilessly swallowing everything. Now she found herself in their hands, and Sif felt even more anxious. First, she must never let them know her true identity. Although her family has now fallen, her status as a former princess of the Cold Moon tribe still holds great value. To powerful people, she is a useful political pawn. She might even be sent to the imperial court to become a plaything for a noble. Sif absolutely cannot accept such a fate. So what should she do now? Her fingers curled slightly, her heart pounding with unease. She quickly dismissed the idea. Her body was too weak to move, and she knew nothing about this place's terrain. Running away suddenly would only result in death on the road or being caught again, making her situation worse. Maybe this is a choice. She could pretend to be obedient, secretly observe everything here, and then find a good chance to escape. But that would require careful planning. She must not reveal her identity or let them suspect she wants to run. Most importantly, she needed to find out what kind of person this lord really was. If he is truly kind-hearted, as the middle-aged woman said, maybe she could breathe a little easier. But if he is just outwardly kind while being cold and ruthless inside, she must prepare for the worst. No matter what, she cannot just wait passively. Suddenly, outside the door, footsteps sounded, followed by a guard's announcement. "The Lord has arrived." Sif's body tensed instinctively, her fingers clutching the bedding, holding her breath. She was mentally prepared to face a wealthy noble with a face full of flesh, a sly smile, and a strong smell of spices. She had even rehearsed countless scenarios in her mind for what was coming next. If the other person insults her, she pretends to be obedient, waiting for a chance to escape. However, when the door is pushed open, the reality is completely unexpected. A handsome young man with black hair walks in. He looks to be just over 20, tall and well-built, dressed neatly and simply. His clothes are neither overly luxurious nor too plain. Everything is just right. He doesn't have a strong, unpleasant smell of perfume, nor flashy jewelry, nor a fierce, bloodthirsty aura. Instead, he seems fresh and sharp. His gaze is observant, but not condescending or scornful. There is even a hint of kindness in his eyes. Sif is stunned for a moment. Is he a noble from the Ironblood Empire? This completely contradicts what she was taught since childhood. In her mind, the Empire's nobles are either greedy, fat drinkers, or cold-hearted killers. They are bloodthirsty, arrogant, and treat the northern tribes as animals. But this young man doesn't look like one of those. She quickly regains her composure, her warning bells ringing. She must not be fooled by appearances. This man might just be better at disguising himself than other southern barbarians. His appearance is clean, and his manners are elegant, but that doesn't mean he has no ambitions or schemes. So she must be even more careful. Sif suppresses her doubts, lowers her eyes, and quietly observes his every move. The room is silent, only the faint crackling of firewood in the fireplace. Lewis stands by the bed, looking at the weak girl in front of him. Her skin is paler than that of the Empire people, with a cold tone typical of the North. Her short silver hair is slightly messy, and her deep blue eyes have a mysterious look. Although she is slender, muscles are hidden beneath her tight skin, like a leopard ready to pounce. Even in her difficult situation, her gaze is proud and cautious, with a subtle sense of alertness. Lewis asks, "What is your name?" Sif looks at him quietly, but does not answer. "Where are you from? And where are you going?" The firelight reflects on her calm, untroubled face. She seems not to hear him and remains silent. A kind-hearted aunt nearby sighs and gently pats Sif's hand. She spoke with a hint of concern. "Poor child, don't be afraid. We are all good people here. The Lord saved you, and he won't harm you." However, Shifu's mind was racing quickly. She knew very well that if she casually lied about her identity, she might be exposed. And if she tried to avoid the question, it could make the other person suspicious. The best way she could think of was to act clueless and pretend she didn't know anything. She didn't want to reveal her true identity, so she decided to stay silent and go along with it. Unexpectedly, the other person's reaction was more understanding than she had expected. Lewis pretended to think deeply as he looked at her. After a moment, he seemed to reach a conclusion and said softly, "Maybe you've lost your memory?" Shifu was surprised. She didn't expect Lewis to give such an explanation voluntarily. She lowered her eyes slightly, neither admitting nor denying, simply accepting his words. Lewis looked at her silver-white hair and said casually, "Since you've lost your memory, you can stay here for now." Then he thought for a moment and showed a mysterious smile, saying, "Your hair is white, so from now on, I'll call you Little White." Suddenly, Shifu's pupils shrank, and anger rose in her heart. She was the princess of the Cold Moon tribe, raised with royal education, taught by her father to carry a noble bloodline and shoulder the future of her people. Now, she was being given a pet-like nickname by a barbarian from the south. She clenched her nails into her palms, trying to hold back her anger. Shifu told herself she couldn't show her emotions or let him discover her true identity. So she remained silent, gritting her teeth, saying nothing. But in her heart, she silently remembered this insult from the barbarian. "Can you read?" Lewis asked casually, as if it was just a random question. Shifu, suppressing her anger, nodded instinctively. But almost at the same time, she realized she had made a mistake. Her reaction was too quick, too natural. In the Cold Moon tribe, only the noble class had the chance to learn the language and writing of the southern people. Although her father deeply hated the southerners, he still hired a southern teacher to teach her language and writing. Now, this could be a flaw that might reveal her true identity. Sif quietly looked up and observed Lewis's expression, trying to guess if he had noticed anything. Lewis seemed unaware of her mistake. He nodded thoughtfully and said, "Then you can be my secretary from now on." Sif was momentarily confused because she had never heard that word before. Lewis explained, "It means helping me remember things and handling small tasks. Don't worry, it's not hard, and there's nothing dangerous about it." Sif lowered her eyes and thought deeply. The word, secretary, didn't sound like a slave or prisoner, nor did it seem like a dangerous job. Compared to being imprisoned, tortured, or even executed, this arrangement was much better. And she didn't seem to have a better choice either. So, Sif gently nodded, accepting this plan. This wasn't giving up, but enduring silently, she told herself. Seeing her response, Lewis's lips curved into a slight smile. Then he stood up and said, "You just woke up. Rest well first, and when you're better, we can talk." He didn't say more and walked toward the door. Sif watched Lewis's back, her fingertips tightening slightly on the bedding, her eyes complex. The man didn't show obvious malice, but he wasn't truly kind either. What was he really thinking? She couldn't tell right now and didn't dare to jump to conclusions. But one thing was clear: no matter what, her main goal wouldn't change. Survive and seek revenge. Meanwhile, Lewis left the room with a faint smile, seeming in a good mood. Letting Sif be his secretary was indeed a good idea. Lewis didn't mind hiding her identity. He had already gathered some information about her through his intelligence system. Who she was didn't matter. What mattered was that she was nothing right now. Even if later he could use her identity, he wouldn't need her permission. For now, as long as Sif was within his territory and under his control, that was enough. Lewis even found her deliberate secrecy a little cute. Like a stray dog rescued from the streets, too afraid to bark, eyes alert at all times, tail slightly tucked. He was reluctant to get close and afraid to act rashly, worried that he might be caught and eaten. As for her being able to write, that was a happy surprise. This way, Hilco's work pressure could be greatly reduced, and he finally wouldn't have to complain every day about being overwhelmed with paperwork. Plus, having a beautiful girl with white hair nearby would definitely improve his mood, right? He happily stepped forward and turned to the craftsman's workshop to discuss building a castle with Mike. The construction of the Red Tide territory was in full swing. Thanks to the easy-to-build semi-underground collective dwellings and the hard-working slaves, rows of neat houses were rising from the ground. The semi-underground collective housing was taking shape. It could be called a miracle in the history of northern construction. Now, knights had their own private rooms, soldiers shared 2 per room, free citizens 3 per room, and slaves 6 per room. Even households could apply for independent residences. Such living arrangements were a huge blessing in the barren northern lands. At least when winter came, no one would be homeless or freeze to death in the snow. This was almost unimaginable in other territories, but under Lewis's governance, it had become a reality. However, just settling the people was not enough. Now that the foundation of the Red Tide territory was gradually solidifying, it was time to allocate half of the craftsmen and laborers to start building a proper lord's castle. The workshop was filled with the smell of sweat, and the sound of hammering echoed through the air. Various craftsmen worked diligently and in an organized manner at their stations. Even apprentices were busy with their tasks. The entire workshop operated like a precise machine, with each part working closely together. The early signs of industry in the Red Tide territory were quietly taking shape. Lewis looked at everything and nodded with satisfaction. His goal this time was clear. He headed straight to the back of the workshop and found the leader of the craftsmen, Mike. Mike was holding a hammer, pretending to be busy, hiding the fact that he had just been slacking off. When Lewis approached, he put down his tools and looked excited. "My lord, why are you here?" "It's time to build a castle," Lewis said directly, without any unnecessary words. "Build a castle?" Mike was instantly excited. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. "Lord, give me 50 years. I will build the largest and most magnificent fortress in the northern border for you." 50 years? I'm already 70. You probably won't live that long, Lewis said with a sigh. He suspected Mike was an enthusiast of grand sights. Mike laughed loudly. "My apprentice will build it after I die, and my grandson will build it after him." Lewis slightly twitched his mouth and couldn't help but comment. "Are you like the foolish old man? Your descendants are endless." Mike scratched his head. "Who is the foolish old man?" Lewis helplessly waved his hand. "It doesn't matter. Be realistic. We don't have much time. The castle must be built quickly. It needs to be fast, functional, and most importantly, defensive." He then took out a detailed castle design drawing from his pocket and handed it to Mike. The blueprint marked the functions of each part of the castle very clearly. The castle must balance defense, functionality, and beauty, but defense is the most important. 80% focus should be on defense, 20% on comfort. Never weaken the defenses just for comfort, Lewis explained, pointing to the detailed notes on the drawing. Mike looked at the blueprint with a subtle expression and finally said with difficulty, "Lord, This design is excellent. But such a stone fortress would take at least 10 years. With this complexity, it might even take 30 or 40 years. Lewis was stunned. 10 years? 30 or 40 years. He had thought he had considered efficiency very thoroughly, but now he realized his plan was unrealistic. He initially planned to build a strong enough fortress as quickly as possible, but it turned out even 30 or 40 years wouldn't be enough. Mike looked at him, smiling awkwardly. Honestly, with our current technology and workforce, it would take time to reach this level. Lewis furrowed his brow, deep in thought. The Red Tide clan had grown somewhat, but it was still vulnerable to external threats. The fortress was not a place of luxury, but a barrier for life and death. Now, the Cold Moon tribe was in chaos, but once unified, they would surely move south. Moreover, the northern border was not the only danger. There were the ice glacier orcs further north, the former snow country rebels, and other crises. These threats were like a speeding dump truck heading straight toward the Red Tide clan. Lewis no longer has 10 or 30 years to wait. He also cannot wait until old age to move into his dream castle. He changes his mind and asks, "Is there a faster alternative?" Mike pauses, hesitates, and says, "Well, He looks at the hammer in his hand and then at the busy craftsmen around him, trying to find a good solution, but in the end, he can only shake his head helplessly. "I haven't gone to school, so I don't have any creative ideas," Mike says with a sad smile. Lewis sighs helplessly and waves his hand. "Forget it. I'll think of a way myself." After saying that, Lewis closes his eyes and begins to recall the classic building shapes he saw in his past life. The high walls of the castle, the sturdy watchtowers, the heavy fortresses. Each building loops in his mind, but all of them would take a lot of time and resources to build. "Not good enough, not fast enough," he murmurs softly. Suddenly, a bright idea flashes in Lewis's mind, like a lightning bolt breaking through the dark silence. "Earth buildings," he exclaims. He remembers the type of building from his hometown in his previous life. It was a unique dwelling built by the Hakka people to escape war, with walls on all sides, strong and durable, and able to hold hundreds of people. It was called the Eastern Ancient Castle. Most importantly, earth buildings could be built quickly. "Yes, that's exactly what I need." He quickly picks up a pen and starts to modify the drawing, changing the complex castle design into a large round barrel shape. Mike stands nearby, frowning. "This looks plain, and it's not very beautiful." Lewis rolls his eyes. "Beauty? What's the use of beauty? Practicality is the most important. It can block enemies and hold everyone inside. That's what matters." He taps the pen on the drawing and explains, "Look, this round shape can evenly distribute external pressure and has strong defense. Plus, using earth as a building material is cheap and quick. No need to spend too much time or resources." Mike, feeling helpless, touches his head and begins to carefully observe Lewis's castle design. But he quickly realizes that Lewis's idea makes a lot of sense. Although this earthen building looks simple and rough, it is undoubtedly a practical and efficient choice. Lewis stood in the center of the craftsman's workshop, waving his blueprint and explaining his building plan to the craftsman. First, site selection is very important. He pointed to a marked spot on the blueprint. The castle should be near the hot spring area, but not too hot. The geothermal energy from the hot spring can provide natural heating for the building. We can also channel hot spring water under the floor in winter, so the floor will stay warm. It's like a natural heated floor. This way, we won't have to worry about the cold in winter." The craftsman looked surprised, never expecting such an idea. Seeing their reactions, Lewis smiled proudly and continued. "Next, the defensive outer wall. We will use a 1-meter thick stone wall in a circular shape, combined with hot spring clay, to form a strong central wall that offers good protection. Inside, there will be wooden houses with large logs as pillars, reinforced with beams, divided into multiple living areas. The first floor will be used for storage, and the second, third, and fourth floors for living. Wooden stairs made from shaved tree trunks will be simple and practical." He drew a simple internal structure on the blueprint. Lewis then explained his ideas further. For defense, the main gate will be covered with thick iron sheets, which can prevent both chopping attacks and fire. The top of the stone wall will have arrow slits, allowing archers inside to defend at any time. Hidden in the roof, will be a boiling oil outlet. When enemies climb close, hot oil can be poured down to scald them. These secret tricks will greatly improve the earthen building's defenses. Finally, he patted the blueprint and summarized: a circle of stones, plastered with mud and grass, with a wooden frame inside, hot spring water as a heater. This earthen castle is ready. The craftsmen were stunned, amazed by this simple yet practical design. What surprised them even more was that Lewis could come up with such a complete building plan in such a short time. A few of them couldn't help but whisper in admiration. "My lord, you're a genius." Mike thought for a moment and nodded slowly. "It is indeed possible. The building process might be shortened to 6 months or even less. But I can't guarantee success because this is a new method, never tried before. Research the specific technology and do your best." Lewis patted his shoulder. Hearing Lewis's words, the craftsmen began to discuss quietly, and an excited atmosphere spread through the workshop. If this bold plan succeeds, it will not only strengthen the defenses of the Red Tide territory, but also boost its reputation in the northern regions. Thus, the Red Tide territory's earth-building project officially started. Duke Calvin, as usual, got up and did his favorite exercises to stretch his muscles. Then he washed up, changed clothes, and finally sat in his study to review a mountain of letters. Most of the letters were dull affairs: land management, economic planning, noble marriages, conflict mediation. Suddenly, his eyes stopped on a special letter. The sender was Lewis Calvin. This name made Duke Calvin pause slightly, feeling somewhat familiar. After a moment of thought, he remembered that Lewis was his 8th son, the child whose mother had died early and who was not very talented. A few months ago, to deal with the Emperor's expansion order, he had casually sent Lewis to develop new land in the northern territories. Too many children make it hard to remember everyone, Duke Calvin sighed, in a Versailles tone. Now he had 10 daughters, 12 sons, and 2 pregnant concubines. He always believed in having many children, thinking that as long as he had enough, some would succeed. And this approach had worked well. For example, his eldest son Gaius was now the vice-captain of the Empire's guards, Dragon Blood Knights. The next head of the Calvin family was probably him. The Duke looked at the envelope with the Calvin family crest, feeling a bit impatient. It was probably a letter begging to return south, but since it had already been sent, he decided to read it. The letter first briefly reported Lewis's safety, saying he had arrived smoothly in the Northern Territory and everything was on track. Then it mentioned some surprising news. Lewis discovered that his territory contained large amounts of cold iron ore and even found a rare mineral called magic marrow. Duke Calvin chuckled softly when he saw this. Magic marrow mines are usually only found in the Jade Federation, and the Iron Blood Empire has very few of them. He thought Lewis was incredibly lucky and didn't believe the boy had simply guessed where to find such valuable resources. Regardless, the value of the land had greatly increased, making it worth investing more resources to develop.